Get set for another stimulating conversation with a Kansas notable. This week we welcome an acclaimed barrister and man of letters. He has argued before the United States Supreme Court and dedicated his law career to serving higher education. Meanwhile, he's a devoted public servant and literary aficionado. By any measure, Ted Ayres is a man of great accomplishment and intellect. He graduated from the University of Missouri School of Law in 1972 and went on to serve as legal counsel at Mizzou. He defended the university in a case before the highest court in the land when he squared off in a spirited exchange with Associate Justice William Rehnquist. Ayres went on to serve as general counsel for the University of Colorado and then the Kansas Board of Regents. In 1996, Ayres was named Vice President and General Counsel for Wichita State University. It was his responsibility to navigate WSU through the maze of legal issues that accompany the complex world of higher education. Among his many accomplishments was helping the university acquire the collected papers of famed photographer and writer Gordon Parks. Now retired, Ted Ayres has continued to serve on various nonprofit boards while affording time to enjoy the finer things of life. One of his most passionate pursuits is reading. Since 2018, Ted Ayres has hosted his own book review program on KPTS titled Inside the Cover. It's proven to be a viewer favorite, and right now he's here on the hot seat to talk about his fascinating life and the lessons learned along the way. It's Ted Ayres for the full half hour one-on-one. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. It's a pleasure to welcome Ted Ayres to the program. Ted, I've known you now 3 years and I've observed you. You're a hard-working person, an attorney, retired from WSU. But I'd like to begin by asking you, where are you originally from?
I was born in Hamilton, Missouri, and it's a little farming community that's located about 45 miles straight east of St. Joe.
And you grew up there, attended high school?
I attended high school, and I guess our community's claim to fame is that it is the birthplace and hometown of J.C. Penney, and I had the opportunity to attend Penney High School there in Hamilton. That was my first alma mater.
Penney High School, and you had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Penney.
I actually did. He came back to Hamilton and was involved in an assembly at our high school, and one of my classmates and I actually made the effort to find him in the superintendent's office and get his autograph and got to shake his hand. He was somewhat on in years at that point in time, but it was still quite a privilege to have a chance to meet James Cash Penney.
James Cash Penney. I would have had a pleasure meeting him too. But tell us about those growing up days when you were growing up, and how did you decide to become a lawyer, which is the background in your family, law?
You know, interesting question, Victor. Truth be known, when I went off to college, my desire was to be a high school football coach.
Oh.
And, you know, I was the first one in the family on either.
Did you play football?
Oh, I did. Okay. I did. You know, it was at a small school. You can pretty much do whatever you want. So I played football. I played basketball. I was track and field. I was on the golf team. I was co-editor of the the yearbook, president of the drama club. So I had to lead in the senior play. Again, small school, right. Easy to do right. What you want to do. I enjoyed sports. I thought I was a pretty good football player, And our head coach, when I graduated, was a younger fellow. And now I look back and realize he wasn't very long out of college, but he drove a Corvette and he had what I thought to be a beautiful wife. And I thought, that's the kind of lifestyle I would enjoy. So I went off to college with that as a goal. Quickly realized that physical education wasn't necessarily going to be right for me. Without guidance or really an indication of no burning desire, I went into business because that's pretty generic, and I figured that would give me a start in a lot of things. And then when it came around time for graduation, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but wasn't certain what field I wanted to follow. And to go back to your question, I think the only acquaintance that I really had with the law growing up was Perry Mason on television. But as I was, and when I graduated from undergraduate school in August of 1969, and there was a conflict going on in Southeast Asia that was pretty much in everybody's mind. And my presumption was that I would be called up pretty much shortly after I graduated from college. But I thought I'll give law school a try if I can get in. So I took the LSAT, only applied to 2 law schools, one St. Louis University Law School, one University of Missouri. Again, that was how limited my horizons were. Right. But got a full scholarship at Mizzou, and so off I went. So it was completely serendipitous that I went to law school, and as it turned out, from a variety of things, I didn't get to call up. So I was somewhat stuck with finishing the 3 years of law school, and I'm glad I did.
So then you decided to go into the representing institutions of higher learning.
Well, ultimately, and thankfully for me.
But how did that happen, first of all?
Well, when I graduated from law school, my first opportunity was I served as a law clerk to a judge on the Missouri Supreme Court. And of course, that's a 1-year appointment. I knew that. And I spent that year kind of relaxing or coming down from the rigors of law school, and used it as a time to explore and make some decisions about what I wanted to do. I ultimately chose to go into a very small law firm close to where I grew up. And it was a 2-person law firm, and did that for a year and a half or 2 years. Just wasn't satisfied, didn't think that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life or where I wanted to live for the rest of my life. So then I made pretty much a quantum shift and had the opportunity to go to St. Louis, Missouri, and join the corporate headquarters legal staff at Southwestern Bell Telephone Company. And it was really a fine job, a really talented group of lawyers that I worked with and for. Still, it didn't resonate with me for that long term. And so I never forget this. I was sitting in the office and happened to had a moment of downtime or free time and was looking at a Missouri Bar Journal, saw an advertisement for a position back at the general counsel's office at Mizzou. And I thought, I'm not totally satisfied here. I love the university, I love Columbia, why not? And ended up getting the job, and pretty much immediately, Victor, I realized that that's how I wanted to spend the rest of my career.
And after you left Mizzou, you went to Colorado?
That was my first opportunity to be a general counsel.
For the university? For
the university, and that university had 4 campuses, so I had responsibility for the main campus in Boulder. We had an academic campus in Denver, we had an academic campus in Colorado Springs, and then a small operation, a med school and hospital in Denver. And all of the legal work for those components of the University of Colorado were my responsibility.
So what enticed you to come to Kansas?
Well, there were a number of factors. Again, I felt like that, when I was at Colorado, Victor, in addition to doing the administrative work and being at the beck and call of the university president and vice presidents and so on and so forth, my office, I had a staff of 3 other attorneys. We were doing all the litigation. And when a judge tells you you're going to be in court, you can't really say, no, I've got a meeting with the president coming up. Mm-hmm. So it was, there was a lot of responsibility, and I didn't feel like that I had enough help. But that was a small component of it, because University of Colorado is an excellent institution and Boulder is a lovely community. But so part of it was the magnitude of the job with the staff I had. And it was also important to both my wife and I, who grew up in small communities. She's from Cottonwood Falls, Kansas. Our grandparents were huge parts of our lives growing up, and we wanted to get our children closer to their grandparents. And then finally, this was a different shift in my career, coming to the Board of Regents office. Up to that point in time, I'd always been on a campus. This gave me an opportunity to be in a governing board that had responsibility for, at that point in time, 7 public institutions in Kansas. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very small Regent staff. There were about 10 of us, but working with them and working directly with members of the Board of Regents gave me a new focus, a new opportunity to broaden my base. And when I went, I always thought I'll be here about 5 years and then I'll get back on a university campus somewhere. Well, that 5 years turned into 10 because I enjoyed what I was doing, but ultimately that led me to the opportunity to come to Wichita and Wichita State. And
you were the attorney at Wichita State.
I was Wichita State's first in-house counsel.
But interestingly, during the course of your career, you had should I say, the pleasure of arguing in the Supreme Court, had a heated exchange with Justice Rehnquist. Tell us about that.
Well, and you can say pleasure or you could say opportunity.
Opportunity.
Victor, and looking back on it, I was only 34. Oh. And I now have sons that are older than I am at that point in time, and so the immensity of that opportunity, when I look back on it, was just huge. So many lawyers never have the chance, right? Never even have a chance to sniff that opportunity to have be in front of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court and try to make your position known. And one of the things that I like to say, or that's memorable for me, is that I was in the courtroom, the U.S. Supreme Court, on Sandra Day O'Connor's very first day as the first female justice. We had gone in a day early so I could see how it worked. So I was there on her very first day of being a justice, which, for someone who loves history like I do and appreciates the law, certainly was fantastic. And then my case, we argued it the next day. And you go in, and of course, this is the way appellate arguments are. You have to be prepared that the judges, or in this case, the justices, know your case as well as you do. They've done their background, they've done their homework, they've read the briefs. So you go in with the idea of you have a specific number of points, legal points, that you want to make. And you go in, and of course it's intimidating. I think it's even a seasoned Solicitor General of the United States who argues frequently in front of the court, I got to believe that it's a high anxiety moment when you're there in front of the justices on their elevated platform. But you go in with the idea that you're going, and you have about 30 minutes. And you go in with the idea, I'm going to make these points. Bang, bang, bang. But in my case, and I think it's not unusual, but I hadn't really got into my initial opening statement when Justice Rehnquist starts peppering me with questions about the case and why we had done this and why were we even here. And of course it was, you used the word heated, I'd say it was very polite, but very direct. And I have to say and tell the audience that I was not successful. We lost 8-1.
Oh.
But basically it was a case dealing with the separation of church and state, and it involved a student group at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which was part of my responsibility. A student group called the Cornerstone Group were meeting and wanted to meet in the Student Union building, and really there wasn't any question to have religious worship services in this publicly funded Student Union building. And so the question was the university even permitted to do that under the federal Constitution and the Missouri Constitution? So it really involved prerogatives of student groups and the interplay, or the, if you will, collision of supporting a recognized student group, but also not running afoul of the Constitution. So that was basically the nutshell of the case. The court felt like that as a recognized student organization, they were entitled to use the facility for those purposes. And even though the university lost the case, it was an opportunity to establish and make law for public higher education. And that case also led to some congressional legislation that permitted the same opportunities for high school students, right, called the All Access Act. So again, had this small role in making law for public higher education.
So when you joined Wichita State, you also did something special for them, helping the university acquire the collected papers of famed photographer and writer Gordon Parks. It was a challenge, but what was so difficult about that?
Well, there were a number of things, Victor, and of course, in my career, I've been so blessed because I've had an opportunity to do a number of things, you might say, outside the practice of law or in addition to the practice of law. And when it was 1999, and I had the opportunity to serve as the acting executive director of the Ulrich Museum of Art on campus. And when I came in, it was shortly after a half-past autumn exhibition of Mr. Parks, hugely popular, hugely successful on our campus. And so when I came in, I had the chance to learn about Mr. Parks, really go in depth about his writing and his work. And we actually acquired, while I was in that role, 4 photographs of Gordon's for the collection at the Ulrich. And of course, those initial 4 photographs have now they're up to about 150 photographs. But the challenge of after Mr. Parks passed, and I did get to meet him in 2000. He came to campus when we unveiled those 4 photographs, and so I had a chance to spend time with him and to meet him and realize what an opportunity that was for me to be in the presence of and have the opportunity to interact with sheer genius. So he, at that point in time after I met him, he became a real hero to me, and I tried to read everything that he had written and everything written about him. And so after his death in 2006, it became known to us that Wichita State might have the opportunity to be in the running to acquire his collected papers. And of course, when Dr. Beggs came into my office and asked me if I would take that assignment, I readily said yes, and in fact told him at the time that it might be one of the most important things that practically I'd ever done for the university. But what made it a challenge, Victor, back to your question, first of all, when Gordon grew up in Fort Scott, obviously he was, I guess, the victim or suffered the woes of racism and discrimination. He had a high school guidance counselor told him, don't waste your money on college because it won't do you any good. And so it was a difficult time, it was a bitter time for him, and I think many of those memories clouded his perspective about Kansas. So that was part of it. The second aspect of it was that there had been a relationship between Mr. Parks and the Ulrich at one point in time, and the university had a number of his photographs. There was a miscommunication, a misunderstanding. Those photographs were sent back to Mr. Parks, and he was rightfully upset, confused, and bitter about that. So that was a little bit of the history. Now, he had started to come around with regard to his feelings about Kansas, and likewise, I think that a number of things had been done to help change his attitude about Wichita State. So we got past that, but then the other reality is that clearly those collected papers were of interest and value to several other institutions, such as the New York Public Library, Harvard University. So we were competing against a number of well-known, well-funded, distinguished competitors to get the papers.
And you got them.
And we got
WSU.
them. We got them.
In addition to your lawyering and your community involvement, you do a lot of reading.
I do.
How many books would you say you have read in your lifetime?
Well, there would a point in time, Victor, when I could tell you the exact number, because as you know, I put together an annual reading list.
Right.
I think it was when I put together the 20th edition of my reading list, I went back and collected all, or counted all the number of books that I'd read over the years, and it seemed like it was something like 1,500 books, and that, of course, is 5 or 6 years ago.
Right. And you've read more books since then.
Yes.
But you also now, because of your reading habits and your enjoyment and pleasure of reading, you have a program on your favorite public television station, KPTS.
I do. And thanks to my favorite executive, president and CEO of that station, and the very talented staff here. I mean, I can't tell you, Victor, if the audience enjoys the show 1/10 as much as I enjoy writing the scripts and doing it, I think we're all well served. It's a great opportunity.
We get good feedback for Inside the Cover.
I'm glad.
It's every week right after, as you know, Doc Martin.
Yes.
And it's a very well-received program.
Well, thank you. I enjoy doing it.
You also serve on various community boards. You were on the board of KPTS once. In fact, you helped hire me for this position here at KPTS.
Let me just say that, in fact, I had a conversation earlier this morning with a friend of mine, and that, and not because we're on your show, but one of the things that I feel best about my community service is having the opportunity to be on the board, actually president of the Board of Trustees at that point in time, and being involved in attracting you and bringing you to Wichita and KPTS. Really, you've done a wonderful job, and I'm glad to have a small part of that.
Well, thank you, and I'm enjoying it.
Good.
Enjoying the community, too. But one thing that stands out of all the boards you served on, one of them is the African American Art Museum, the Kansas African American Art Museum. And you served as the chairman or the acting executive director of the board, and also chairman of that board.
That's exactly right. Had the opportunity. I've been on that board since I think 2015, and you know, part of what we're looking at is the museum. What is its role in our community and in Kansas? And it's really much more than art. It's history, it's education, it's art, it's culture, and so really look into how best bring the museum up to its potential.
Right.
So I've been on the board since 2015. When our prior director, a very good friend, a colleague of mine, Mark McCormick, who actually worked with Mark on the Gordon Parks Papers project, when Mark, he was the one that got me on the board, and then when he decided to take another position in Kansas City, the board asked me to come in and serve as an interim executive director.
So my question to that is, what does that say about race relations in Wichita? Because you being a Caucasian, serving as executive director of the Kansas African American Museum, I was impressed to hear that, to be honest.
Well, thank you, and I think it speaks well, Victor. I mean, it's a very perceptive and interesting question. I like to think that it reflects well on Wichita, it reflects well on the museum and the people that support and love the museum. And you know, I've never had a negative reaction about my participation or my role of service, and I think that reflects extremely well.
So what can we expect from Ted Ayres over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I've given some thought to writing a book or books. I would really like to take Inside the Cover to the next level. I would like to keep working at the Kansas African American Museum to take it to another level. A lot of travel. I'd like to spend some more focus on my photography. But you know, Victor, it's really being able to be a good father, be a good husband, and being somebody that, while enjoying life, is also making a contribution. And you know, I've thought about going back to work, whether it's at a bookstore or back in some element of the practice of law. But you know, it's enjoying life, taking advantage of the opportunities that I've been given, and try to give back as much as I can.
Ted Ayres, attorney, community leader and volunteer, husband and grandparent.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you
It's been
so
a
much
pleasure.
for joining us.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this edition of One-on-One. Send us an email if you have any questions or comments. oneonone@kpts.org is the address. Until next time, I'm Victor Hogstrom. Thanks for watching.